Here's the thing, we're basically trying to work two farms at the same time. The one we have now,
and the one we're planning and growing for next year. This is the month when we need to get our hardy annuals into the ground for overwintering.
it's also the month when our dahlias really start taking off, so we have a huge workload between now and the first frost. Not gonna lie, this is a stressful time of year where we feel especially stretched.
But we've got to figure out the best way to get through the work as efficiently as we can. A big part of what's going on behind the scenes this time of year is soil blocking, so we can start seeds.
Thousands of seeds every week. We've learned a lot about what works best for our farm over the past couple of years, so today we're going to start some soil blocks and show you how we start seedlings. And let's also have a conversation about how we can maybe fix this stressful part for next season.
Let's do it.
We're Rob and Christy, and we're on a mission to cut ties with the traditional 9-to-5 suburban lifestyle.
And instead follow our dreams of building a home, farm, and life in the Pacific Northwest.
Rob has spent over 2 decades in education.
And Christy is a psychosocial researcher who has dedicated more than 10 years to studying people's experiences with creating meaningful lives.
We decided to put that research to the test, break free from living in the comfortable middle, and say yes to life by becoming our own experiment in cultivating a life well lived.
What we lack in qualifications and skill, we more than make up for with enthusiasm and grit.
So we're starting from the ground up and documenting the entire journey as we go. Since we do have a double workload this time of year, it's really important for us to divide up the tasks to get work done. So Rob does most of the soil blocking while I do most of the seed starting. When we discovered soil blocking, we were pretty much hooked from the start. It reduces our plastic waste, makes a healthier seedling for transplanting, and it saves so much space. In the same space as a 50-cell tray, we can start a good 300 seeds in mini soil blocks. So it's a really efficient way to start seeds. But let's talk about the soil blockers that we use as well as how we use them. So the first one is the mini blocker. The mini blocker makes 20 soil blocks at a time. They're each 3/4 inch cubes. And so these are great for planting like snapdragons or lysianthus or little, small seeds. They're perfect for that size. What'll end up happening is these small little soil blocks will end up getting bumped up into the large blocker after some time and letting them grow. And that's this one. This is the 2-inch blocker, so it makes a 2-inch cube. There are 4 at a time. And we changed out inside are what are called dibbles. Dibbles are just where you put the seeds. So it's also a verb, so you can dibble the soil, or you can call these dibblers or dibbles. It's all the same thing. So you can change it out to these square ones that are the exact same size as the squares that are produced by this mini blocker. So you'll take these little seedlings once they've sprouted and have a few leaves on them, and then just plop them into this size of a block to continue to grow on. We don't start any seeds in the 2-inch blocker because we found that it's just not the most efficient thing. We used to actually use them, but we've gone away from that because we now use the medium blocker. The medium blocker makes a 1.5-inch cube. The difference between the medium blocker and the large blocker, it seems like not a lot, but it is, because when you're thinking about how many seeds that you can start, in a standard 10-20 tray, you can fit 75 of the medium blocks in that tray versus only 50 of the large blocks. And by doing that, so that's 1.5 times the number of seeds in a single tray, but you're gonna use less than half of the amount of soil by volume. So that makes a huge difference. That's why we actually purchased the medium blocker and found that it works so much better for what we wanna start. By default, this is going to come with a short dibble that looks like this. We're changing ours out today to the long dibbles because we're going to be starting sunflowers, and those seeds are a little bit larger, so it just helps to be able to drop them in more easily. But you can certainly use the short dibbles. It doesn't really make a difference. Either way works fine. The medium size also works great for vegetables and larger seeds, or you can use it for smaller seeds as well that maybe you don't want to have to worry about bumping them up later. So you could start them straight away here. The only reason that we don't is because we start thousands of seeds in those mini soil blocks, and in case, we maybe don't have like the best germination rate, we don't want to start the seeds in a large block, which does use more mix, if it maybe isn't gonna sprout, because that's just wasteful, right? So we start them in the small soil blocks. It's faster. We save so much more space on our propagation rack by starting them that way. And then once we know that they've germinated and they're a healthy small little sprout, then we bump them up into the larger block. Either way works, and there's pros and cons of both methods. So you just kind of have to find the one that works for you based on how much space you have and how you just start seeds and that sort of thing. Okay, now let's talk about trays, because that also makes a big difference. So when we're using the medium and the large blocker, we're using a standard 10-20 tray. We use a liner. It's got a mesh bottom with the flat bottom 10-20 tray. So it just fits right inside, and that allows us to bottom water our seedlings. It works really, really well. This year we actually upgraded our bottom trays because we found that, well, they just don't last very long. So these were the old ones that we used to buy, and they fall apart so quickly. They're so much more fragile. The plastic is just not gonna last for very long. But these trays, these are hard trays. I mean, you could carry a load of bricks in this and it's not gonna break or bend, which is really nice because we like to be able to pick up a tray that's completely full of seedlings with one hand. And in this, that's why these break, because they're just too flimsy to support the weight of those seedlings. We can do that here. And so these are gonna last us for years. They're definitely worth the extra investment. So we just line the bottom of the tray with a mesh tray and soil block right on top of it. But for the minis, well, you technically can use a mesh bottom tray for the minis. I haven't had great luck with it because it's much more difficult to bottom water the minis in that mesh tray. The minis, there's just not very much soil that you're working with, and when they get too wet, they do start to sort of disintegrate. You don't want that to happen and then have all the soil basically end up in the bottom of the tray. The blocks are so tiny as it is. So for our minis, we use just a flat tray, and I'll link these down below. They're just like the cafeteria trays that we used to get in school, right? But they're perfect. This size tray, I can fit easily 200. The most I've ever gotten on one of these trays is like 256, I believe. I don't recommend that. They're pretty crammed when you put that many of the mini soil blocks on here, but I mean, you can see 20 at a time, right? So you can fit quite a lot into this tray as you go, but easily 200. We start 200 all the time on this size of tray. So what we're going to be showing you today is starting seeds with all three different soil blockers. We're going to be using the medium-sized soil blocker that Rob's using right now to start sunflower seeds. We're going to be using the mini soil blocker to start snapdragons. These are going to be for overwintering next year. And then we are going to be using the large blocker to block up some mini blocked seedlings that we already have on our propagation rack that desperately need to get into a larger size block to let their roots expand a little bit, which will also be going out to overwinter for next year. very real problem on our hands. We are in a place where we are effectively trying to run 2 farms at once. The one that we have right now and the one that we're building for next year. And basically from mid-July to mid-fall, we're stretched incredibly thin, which is just, ultimately is just not sustainable to the growth that we want to see on our farm.
And it's a weird concept, the whole 2-farm thing. It's like currently we're trying to harvest and there's things growing and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, but that takes a lot of work. And we also have this kind of futuristic farm where we have to plan and start getting seeds in and doing a bunch of other things to make sure that's ready. So that's kind of taking 2 spots taking our energy at the same time.
Right. So we're kind of trying to figure out options that we might consider to address this for next year, because we know this just isn't sustainable going forward. Particularly when we're going to be, growing more in the future. So the first option that we've thought of course, is more people would be someone else to spread the work to, right? So hiring someone. But there's downsides with that.
Sounds great to me. But there's costs and money, there's the time it takes to train someone, there's, managing someone else who's, not here on the farm and someone outside. So while there's some positives, there's also a lot of negatives that we have to kind of take into factor.
And we're early in farming, right? So this is the first year that we're even trying to figure out how to make money, let alone spend it on somebody else. So you got to try to balance that out.
I think there's that center time where you're growing and like you want to make that jump to expand, or you might need more help, or you want to go bigger. However, you're not quite there yet for other reasons. So sometimes it's almost like this little like a cliff, and you have to like almost jump over this thing.
Well, I think it's a leap of faith.
Yeah.
Don't you see this happening in like every situation though, where you're trying to get from like where you are now to where you want to be? There's always this place where you can't keep your footing in this one place anymore if you want to make that last step to the next place, and it's just going to be part of the process. But we've got to figure out, what the balance is for us there. And then the other option that we're considering is not doing cut flowers anymore, which sounds crazy as a flower farm, right? But we're primarily a dahlia farm, and we want to be able to grow both the dahlia flowers and the dahlia tubers, but we do all these other cut flowers, right, in order to make bouquets and that sort of thing. And we're considering, is that profitable? Does it make sense for us to do the cut flowers? But then there are downsides to taking them away as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say that could be risky because you're putting all those eggs in one basket. If there's any type of virus on any certain type of flowers, or critters are going after a certain type of flower, there's all these things that you have to kind of consider, because if one type of crop gets kind of wiped out, you have others to kind of lean into. But if you put all those eggs into the dahlia basket, then it becomes a little more risky also.
Yeah, monocropping is inherently risky, right? Because it means your entire crop is susceptible to the same problems, whether that's like Rob said, viruses or pests that may come in, because especially if there's a concentration of a certain crop, then you might attract a mass amount of a certain type of pest to that area, and they can like wipe you out, right? So we have to think about whether or not that makes sense when we're farming on a relatively small scale. We don't have huge acreage, right? So like if you're farming wheat or corn or something like that, and you have like hundreds and hundreds of acres, then okay, so you can monocrop because you might deal with loss in some certain amount of your acreage, but the rest of your crop might be okay potentially. But even that, of course, is risky. Every farmer knows that, right? So again, there's pros and cons to this, but there are things that are on the table for us that we are certainly considering, because we certainly, can't continue the way that we are. We have to address this for next year.
And I think it's with any endeavor. We're just looking at, okay, where are our struggles? And then what could we do to pivot? We haven't decided what that would be yet, but we're just always on the lookout for ways to improve. And so we're seeing some of our struggles right now going, okay, so for next year, what can we do differently? And these are just certain options that we are kind of starting to roll around in our heads.
But I think ultimately, like the thing that we rely on and that we have for a long time is this idea that you want to be very firm about the vision, but you've got to be flexible about the path to get there. And I think that's so important. I mean, so we know that we want to build a farm that can support our family and that we want to live this particular lifestyle that we're cultivating. How we do that is the part, we talked about this in our season 2 opener, is the part that we're kind of figuring it out as we go. And I think it's really important for us to stay very open to different possibilities to see what works and what doesn't work, because it's not the same answer for every farm, and we have to be aware of that.
And sometimes the what might be the answer long term, we don't even know what it is. We haven't even thought of it. It's still out there. So I think being open to those different pivots is important.
Yeah, because if you get really bogged down in a particular way of doing something, or you have a vision, but then you also you've sort of plotted out the steps that you intend to take to get there, and every milestone and checkpoint along the way, that really narrows your vision down to this particular path and this particular set of steps, essentially, right? And it keeps it so that you can't see other opportunities that might be coming up because you're just so single focused on this one thing. And I think it's good to be single focused, in a bigger sense. I mean, it's a funny thing to think about, but you don't want to get yourself too distracted, right? Because the opposite of what I'm talking about, I guess, is somebody who's just sort of aimless and wandering. And what we're trying to find is that happy middle.
The important part is have clarity on what you want to accomplish. If something's going to work, great, you just continue with it. But if not, you have to be willing to change and adjust.
Yeah, and I think most people, this is generally speaking, most people will give up at that first sign of resistance, that first obstacle that they don't have a solution for how to resolve it. But successful people don't. And, they have more resiliency when they reach, either a dead end or a roadblock. And then they're able to look around and find ways to resolve things. So, I mean, that's the difference between, being firm about the vision, but flexible about how you get there, right? I mean, you're focused on that destination, but the path, you figure out the path as you go. You want to reach the top of the mountain. How you get to the top of the mountain isn't the part that you really need to be fixated on.
I think the other thing is people who are successful, when they run into those roadblocks or things that don't work, they don't then beat themselves up for being a failure. They go, okay, now I've learned something. I have to now do something different. And I think just kind of it's that frame of mind. It's that kind of the way you view things makes a big difference on whether you continue to go or you just kind of stop.
Yeah, and that's really where we are right now. I mean, just to be completely honest with with where we're at in this farming journey, is that we can see already in year 1 that there are some things that aren't working and that are not going to be sustainable for us with the growth that we would like to see. And we need to figure out some solutions for all these particular problems that we're identifying before it becomes compounded, because our intention is to grow exponentially, right? So when we're growing even more dahlias next year, then the problem will just be essentially worse. And so we have to figure out how to address that.
So figuring out when the problem's smaller makes it a lot more efficient eventually, because we can figure it out when we're going bigger. So.
And certainly new problems will come up as we continue to go along and figure out, new little roadblocks that we stumble over. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be getting a lot more in depth about some of these problems that we're identifying and some of the solutions that we're putting on the table that we're considering for next year. So you'll want to stick around for this journey to see how it unfolds. But in the meantime, we hope that you're out there digging deep, cultivating those big dreams in your life, and growing a life well lived.
Thanks for watching.
And we're changing ours out today and putting in the long dibbles because we're going to be making some I don't remember what I was saying. Whoa.
Hakuna Matata.